Hey friends, today I'm coming at you with another misidentification video. Today is 4 versus 8. This is a misidentification that has been coming up a lot for me in consultations. So if you don't know, I offer consultations over Skype or FaceTime, and do that actually more frequently than I thought I would. It's sort of increased over the past year and just have loved it. I feel like people really get a lot out of it. And as I was saying, one that I've been getting a lot over the past 6 months is 4 versus 8, especially for women. And so I thought I would cover it in a video. To be completely honest, sometimes I lose track of like what I've covered and what I haven't. So now and then I kind of have to go back and comb through my catalog and be like, okay, like did I do 2 versus 4? Done that? Okay. And I saw that I hadn't done this. So as with all misidentifications, I feel like a very specific type of person falls into these specific boats of confusion. So like the person that falls into the boat of like 3 versus 8 probably is not going to fall into the boat of 4 versus 8. So we have very unique individuals. And of course, that just gets my mind going about that much more research I could do on even further distinction in the Enneagram that I don't know, maybe even hasn't been made yet. But for the most part, I think falls along the lines of instincts. So usually the people that come to me in this type conundrum end up being SX first individuals. So I've said before in videos that some of the Enneagram types tend to feel like a certain instinct. So we have to kind of guard against like someone not thinking like, oh, I'm a 6, so thus I'm SP, or like, oh, I'm a 3, so thus I'm SO or social. Just because 3s feel very much like the social instinct, and 6s can feel very self-protective. Those elements are completely separate. So like there are 6s that are self-preservation, but there are also 6s that are intimacy first or social first. So it's something that we really have to guard against. But one of the things that I often say about that is that 4 and 8 tend to be the types that feel SX. So when I get somebody who's stuck in this conclusion, a lot of times they are that legitimate like SX4 or SX8 that feels almost like doubly SX. So they find themselves in this conclusion of probably 2 of the most intense types in the Enneagram. I would say SX5, all the SX varieties are intense people, but SX7s are very intense people. But the person that finds themselves between SX4 and SX8 is a special bird. So if that's you, I'm glad you're here. So some of the distinctions that we make right off the bat are, as I'm sure you've done already, gut and heart. And actually, even though I just said head, that's sort of a distinction too. The problem people mostly have though is looking at that 5 wing of 4 compared to 8, because the 5 wing brings into play a lot of headiness to a 4. And that's usually something that 8s relate to. And but I would say that distinction, sitting in that distinction of gut versus heart, is really important. And looking at what is it that causes me to move in the world? Is it my feelings? Is it the way that I emote? Or is it the way that I instinctually have this like movement before thought or feeling? So that's kind of the difference. Is gut types tend to move first and think or feel later. And I would say a lot of 8s actually tend to relate to the thought of not necessarily not having feelings, but not being very good at feelings, and tending to sometimes just let the floodgates open on their feelings and just like, things are incinerated because they did that. It's like that volcanic eruption, or just locking it down and not feeling it all. I'd say 4s, on the other hand, tend to have much more flux of feeling. There's like sadness and bliss and agony, and there's much more of a variety of emotions that flow through a 4. And I would say that there is that distinction between gut and heart. I'd say another huge distinction that we see between 4 and 8, and this is why I love to do Skype and FaceTime consultations, is physiological manifestation. It's just legit. It's just real. Is the way that a 4 or an 8 present themselves to the world is very, very different. So I'd say that's actually one of the big ones is not necessarily how a person looks, but what's motivating them looking that way, or what's motivating them presenting themselves that way. So 4s tend to be much more expressive through their aesthetic presentation. 8s tend to be much less concerned with that. They can still be very creative people. They can still be very expressive people. I'm thinking of actually the last woman that I talked to about this definitely saw herself as an expressive person, a creative person in her pursuits and in her practices of art, and in even like collecting art and things like that. Especially an 8 with a 9 wing, I'll say, will feel more expressive or more philosophically minded, which of course makes them look at 4 and say, wait a minute, because 4 is such a philosopher as well. So I definitely want to validate you if you're in this situation and say, a lot of people will tell you 4 and 8 are so different, but they have so much in common too. So I completely get why you're here if you're here. But they do have a lot of distinctions when we get down to that finer heart level or gut level stuff. And I would say that physical manifestation is a big one. 4s tend to be, there's a question on the Enneagram Institute test, if you've ever read The Wisdom of the Enneagram, which is a book I recommend across the board for people to start with. But there are short tests in that book, and I always remember this question on the 4 test that says something to the effect of, there's nothing worse than bad taste, or something like that. It's like this very snobby statement, but a lot of 4s would agree with that, and that not sort of a globally agreed upon taste, but their own personal preferences for taste, if those are violated aesthetically, 4s can feel very like offended and very like, ugh, like this is not right, it's not beautiful, it's not expressing aesthetic value. 8s, on the other hand, don't tend to, I think, see beauty that way. 4s tend to want to get beauty out of things. They want to, even the darkest, most ugly things, they want to get something out of it, some beauty. They want to see potential for beauty, even in something that everyone else ignores. 8, on the other hand, doesn't tend to seek for beauty, but tends to seek for autonomy and freedom. So that's something that we talk a lot about in the 8 material, and in some of the other videos I've done on 8 in misidentifications and whatnot, is that ideal of freedom, that ideal of not being controlled. So a lot of times 8s get this bad rap of being controlling of others, but most of the time it's actually that they don't want to be controlled. And that's, if they do try to control others, what causes that. That's the motivation is, okay, I don't really care what you do unless you, or as long as you leave me alone and don't try to control me. The one caveat to that 8s often remind me of is, unless there's a vacuum of leadership. If there's just total chaos, they'll take control and move with it. But usually 8s are not just like aggressing people if those people are leaving them alone, you know? So that's a big difference, I'd say, between 4 and 8 too, is those motivations. 4s are just highly motivated by finding meaning and beauty and value and feeling like they have to be different or have to be individualistic in order to have value, which really is a lie that they believe. They kind of have to come to this point of seeing that beauty can be in the simple things. Beauty can be in mundane things and very commonplace things. Things don't have to be a fingerprint or a snowflake in order to have value. I'd say, and then those 8 values of freedom and autonomy. I'd say too that in the realm of that taste topic we're talking about, 8s tend to be much more brash people, verbally, in physical presentation. They really are more provocative and offensive. I know some 4s would push back against that because 4s do like to be provocative, but it's in much more of a like seen and not heard way unless they're engaged, because 4s are more withdrawn than 8s. 8s also tend to not make as much an art out of it as 4s. If 4s are provocative, it tends to come across as very calculated is the wrong word, but very intentional and very sincere and very put together aesthetically. 8, on the other hand, is offensive and brash and kind of like not a thoughtless way, but in a move first, think later type of way. In the way that they speak, in the way that they engage things, and even in the way that they get dressed in the morning, tends to have this air of confidence, but in a I'm really not thinking about it type of way. It's something that we always note in the 8-3 misidentification is that 3s calculate and plan and structure everything. 8s just move. So that's a big difference between 4s and 8s too, is that 4s tend to be really, really bad at action unless they have a 3-wing. But 4s tend to really have to motivate themselves to do something with their work or do something with their thought life or with their mind or with their heart. They're prone to and tempted to really stay inside and just ruminate and keep journals and do their artwork at home. And like, there's that shame piece that keeps them from sharing that with the world. 8, on the other hand, is a mover. No matter what they're doing, they're making something. They're doing something with it. They're putting it out in the world. They're bringing it to their workplace. They're bringing it out into the marketplace. So that's a huge high strength of 8 that I would say is a good indicator if you're stuck in the situation between 4 and 8. The places people usually get stuck are really with those wings. I think especially comparing 4 with a 5-wing to 8 with a 9-wing, it brings in that withdrawn piece with the 5 and 9 components even more. And the philosophical piece, the thinking piece. So I really get that. That's something that I've had to just walk alongside people in specific situations and help them identify, especially looking at instincts, regardless of whether they're SX first, as I mentioned earlier, or not. So if that's you, if you want a Skype consultation or just, like a one-on-one in order to walk through this stuff, I'm always willing to do that. My schedule's kind of tight right now. As some of you may know, I have almost 2-year-old triplets, so that is like my main gig right now. So, but I do make time to schedule consultations during the week. So if that's you, feel free to reach out. I hope this information really helped someone out there in the 4-8 conundrum. It's a tough one, but I really think we can make the distinction. I'm trying to think if there are any other thoughts at the end. Oh, I always compare 4 and 8 as kindred, but different in that 8s are sadistic and 4s are masochistic. I have people push back sometimes against connecting 8 with the word sadistic as if that's a crime. But let's please remember, each of the Enneagram types is associated with sin patterns. So we're not looking at these like the Strengths Finder. We're looking at these like a raw mirror image of ourselves and our potential for sin. It may not be something that you've indulged in, but usually 8s tend to have that sadistic thought pattern of wanting to cause people humiliation who are causing them trouble or who are their adversaries, or wanting to cause destruction or destroy things that are bad in their opinion, or destroy things that are hurting other people. 4, on the other hand, in that masochism piece, tends to turn inward towards the self instead of turning outwards in war towards others, as 8s do. 4s turn inward and really have that huge shame piece of like, what's wrong with me? Why am I so deficient? I must just be inherently broken. Someone in a comment recently said she was deep down, she was just ashamed of existing. And I mean, as a 4 myself, I can't relate to that thought, but I do think a lot of 4s do, and just feeling like, especially when they're in a dark place, like, what purpose do I really have? Because a lot of that is because they can't manifest their work, or it's really hard. They can. I'm doing it right now, but like, it's really hard to do. It's hard to motivate the self. 8s are super easy to motivate. So that's a huge difference. Now I'm rambling, but I hope these differences have really helped you to identify between these types. As always, feel free to reach out. And hey, if you haven't checked out my Instagram, there's a lot of unique content there that I don't put here on YouTube. I'm in the middle of a health series describing the health structure of each Enneagram type specifically. I just finished 5, and 6 will be up next week. I do this like every week, once a week, film a video. One week goes to YouTube, next week goes to Instagram. So I'm not creating redundant content between the two places. So if you haven't checked that out, please go check it out. Same handle there. So thanks for tuning in, guys, and I'll see you next time.